So we've got a special episode of Relicbuds for you. It is a conversation I had with Alex Huntley. He is the artist and creator behind Arcworlde and the Warp Miniatures digital workshop Patreon. I've been familiar with his work for a long time, as we'll go into during the show. And, you know, he was an inspiration for me early on, kind of deciding to become an independent game maker and miniatures maker. And it's really cool to finally sit down with him, have a conversation about where we came from and about, you know, being these indie guys in this industry. It's to prepare you. It's going to be quite a bit of shop talk, quite a bit of hanging out, and the conversation is a ton of fun for me, and hopefully gives you a little bit of behind the scenes look at Relicblade, at Arcworlde, and some of our conversations that might happen behind the scenes between two folks that are really working in this surprisingly small industry, but with a lot of fun and love for what we're working on. So I'm going to jump into the recording and enjoy.
Right, okay. I mean, I could just hold the mic like this. It makes it a lot easier.
It's true. Okay, so this is a special recording. It's the first time I've done this. It could be like Relicbuds. It could be something different. Maybe it's Arcbuds. Maybe it's Relic like Arc or Arcblade.
What about
I think Arcblade probably works.
Sculptbuds.
Sculptoroni.
Sculpting buds.
Yeah, it's like cottage industry, indie sculptors. All right, so I've been familiar with your work since I was an actual child, and I'm older than you, so that's a sort of a funny thing. My first exposure to Alex Huntley is on a message board called Warseer, and there was you had a thread that was like 9,000 pages long, called The Host of the Feathered Serpent.
Oh, well remembered.
Yeah.
Well remembered. Oh, yeah. Like, I mean, that is how, you know, I first got started in the hobby, really. Because, like, my kind of introduction to miniature wargaming was actually from I'm not sure if you guys in the US had this, but when the Lord of the Rings movies were first released, Games Workshop used to do these, like, bi-monthly magazines about Lord of the Rings, and it had classic miniatures.
We didn't get any of that, but so many people talk about how that's how they got into the hobby. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we missed out.
Really? Oh, they were so good. You got paints, you got like miniatures in, and some pretty good models, which were like in this really cheap like magazine. And you know, in 2001, 2002, I was 9, so it really was like, I was at just the right age to kind of be like suckered into this. And, you know, I loved it. Like, I was, even back then, you know, I was converting models, but I really felt like it was quite restrictive because, you know, you had to I felt like, oh, I can't just make up characters because the movies are there. I have to, you know, stay true to what the movies are. And then I was taken by a friend of my parents to a little place that you guys over there might have heard of called Warhammer World, which was, let's say it was transformative.
You guys weren't into Space Marines. You saw Lord of the Rings. You got some toys, and then went to Warhammer World.
Like immediately, like because basically what kind of like suckered me into Warhammer was Lizardmen. Lizardmen were my first Warhammer love. They're still my favorite army. And what 10-year-old boy doesn't want to play with dinosaurs with swords, right? It's literally like tailor-made to have like hooked me in. And it was amazing because Warhammer was a much more open field. I was given so many more opportunities to create new characters, create new monsters, and that's when I started my blog, which was the Host of the Feathered Serpent, which was where I would convert my Lizardmen army. And then, I had other blogs on other forums as well. Like I had a really big one on the Warhammer forum. I had one of my first ones was a Chaos Dwarfs Online, because I tinkered with Chaos Dwarfs for a while. The Ogre Stronghold was another great one. What was the lizard? There was a Lizardmen specific forum as well. I think it was called like the Pyramid Vault.
Yeah,
I think that might have been it. Something like that. But, and I was just posting on there, the communities of all of those forums were so incredibly, like, welcoming and so incredibly supportive. Because, by that point, I was, like, 13, 14.
Yeah.
So, it was the kind of the encouragement of these online communities that really kind of spurred me on to create and to push myself, because I was constantly thinking, oh, what next? What's I going to make next? And people give me advice, what worked, what didn't work, and and that just built up over time until I got to the point where I was sculpting whole miniatures. And it was when I was 17 that I first kind of started Warplock. Well, at the time, it was Warplock Miniatures because my forum username was Warplock Monkey. But being the absolute 200 IQ genius I was at 17, I thought, oh, no, I'm going to respell it as something really cool and interesting.
Something that people will remember and be able to Google.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's like, Baroque. Baroque's a cool word. It's kind of fantasy. I'm going to spell Warplock like that. And obviously, no one could ever remember how it was spelled.
It's funny because you rebranded to Warp pretty recently.
Yeah, within I think it's less than 18 months ago.
Yeah.
Less than 18 months ago that I decided, all right, now's the time. Like, I think it was interesting because I was actually, the reason why I finally made the jump was I was having a conversation with someone, and they out and out just said to me, like, Warplock's a terrible name. Like no one can spell it. And I was like, I know this, but I felt I was too deep to change it.
Yeah.
But that was literally the straw that broke the camel's back, where I was just like, it is a dumb name.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's funny
because I do need to change it.
Like the word warp, it's funny because the logo, it's still like the same sort of typography. So dropping the lock, it just, to me, was really seamless when you were like, it's warp now. It's like, oh, all right, that's easier to say. So it's funny.
No, honestly, like, it was because in my head, I think I'd kind of built it up to be this massive thing where I had to change everything over, and it was really simple. Literally, it was so simple. And everyone, literally, I think out of like the thousands of followers and stuff like that I have, there's maybe 2 people that grumbled, just because they were the type of people that grumble when anything changes. Yeah. So, but everyone else is just like, Alex, you should have done this years ago, man. Yeah. Like, this is so much better.
So we're getting ahead of ourselves. So, all right, you did you started traditional sculpture because I mean, when we were kids, we could get green stuff, we could get wire, we could get milliput, right? Yeah. And we could mash things together.
Absolutely.
And so I did some scratch sculpting, but you have to be so patient. Yeah, like layers need to dry between, and I did a couple like Nurgle creatures, or like what are the Necron demon angel creatures? I did one of those.
Oh, Catan.
Yeah, Catan.
I think
because I couldn't afford it, right? So really, like, scratch sculpting is really about not being able to afford stuff.
Literally. Yeah,
But
it was a DIY opportunity to get into Warhammer when you're like 15 and you can't afford these like really expensive kits.
yeah, and I always wanted more orc shamans, and I didn't want to just like have multiple of the same figure, so I sculpted myself a bunch of orc shamans. That was pretty fun.
Nice.
But when I started like trying to make a game, I sculpted some figures and realized like I was not good enough. And so that's where digital came in, and like I wouldn't be doing it without digital, because part of the patience and material and everything, the digital workflow works so well for me because I'm so impatient. I don't have to wait for anything to dry. I don't have to mix anything. I don't have to add Vaseline to my putty. But I still approach the whole workflow in a totally traditional way where I'm adding like blobs and stuff. But you were doing traditional even through the launch of Arcworlde, which you did in a Kickstarter, right?
Oh yeah, like I only started digitally sculpting about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So up until that point, every model I made was hand sculpted, and so it wasn't actually until COVID, and so basically the story goes was that in 2020 I was meant to be going to Adepticon. Adepticon's the one in Chicago, right?
Yeah. We would have met if it hadn't canceled finally.
Yeah, I
in person.
know. And like I'd booked the flights, I'd booked the Airbnb, everything was ready to go, and obviously something happened that kind of cancelled everyone's plans.
Yeah.
And I was so like annoyed at myself. And basically, like someone who I know in the community, a lad called Dan from Lion Tower, he had been on to me being like, Alex, man, you got to get into this digital sculpting, because he's a digital sculptor as well. And I was like, oh, but I like traditional sculpting. And he was like, nah, man, you've got to do it because it's great. Like, I've got my Patreon. Have you heard of Patreon? And I'm like, yeah, I've heard of it. And he's like, I get an income every month. And I was like, okay, right. I'm just sat here annoyed because my big American trip had been cancelled. I'm going to use the week that I would have been in America constructively, and I'm going to teach myself, with the help of Dan and YouTube, how to use ZBrush and how to digitally sculpt, and it's completely changed my life.
Yeah.
It has. I mean, obviously, like, I love hand sculpting. I still hand sculpt some models in the range. Like, my big monsters are still hand sculpted, but the ease and the freedom that digital sculpting has allowed me to do has just completely changed everything. Like, I started my Patreon in May 2020, and I've been doing that ever since. I carried on hand sculpting my Arcworlde range until 2022, so that kind of lasted. Actually, I think I did a few in 2021. Basically because I was like, I kind of felt a bit guilty about not hand sculpting everything because I've done it for so long.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like reputation, like some of your fan base is there because they're like, I don't know, they want it to be putty, but at the same time, like the reason your sculpts are so characterful is you, and so when you transition to digital, it was really striking to me how like, oh yeah, it's totally Alex's style. And I jumped on your Patreon, and it makes it so I can have your style sculpts all over, and I get them each month. And so that's very cool. And I haven't messed with setting up a Patreon because I'm worried like I'm already so scrambled to try and keep up with everything that I can't imagine.
I know
like
that feeling very well.
Yes, I mean I'm already hustling more than I can handle, so I don't know if I can say.
It's self-employed. It's being a self-employed creative, man. Yeah. It's literally like our bread and butter. We've got to be spinning about 5 different plates at once. But no, I absolutely get that. And actually, one of the things that I have struggled with, especially since moving to digitally sculpted for Arcworlde as well, is that I think that because both ranges are fantasy and both ranges are they're very much in my style, which is kind of characterful, lighthearted. A lot of people are like, oh, is this Arcworlde? or is this Digital Workshop? So the distinction I'm trying to make is, the metal and resin version, the metal and resin models are Arcworlde, that's a tabletop game. The 3D printable ones are Digital Workshop, which are more generic fantasy. Yeah. They're meant to be used in any tabletop system, which means you can use them for Arcworlde if you want, but they're not specifically for Arcworlde.
It's an interesting thing, because like it would be cool to have rules for my Dark Dwarves in Arcworlde. But I also use those Dark Dwarves in Saga, and I use them in Sludge, and I use them in... what other games have I actually thrown them on the table for? Rangers of Shadow Deep, Frostgrave, like they fit
very
in
well
so
traveled.
Well. Yeah, but they're also like really characterful, really wacky, and tons of fun. So it's interesting, the decision to keep them separate, and that's one thing I've really struggled with thinking about releasing STLs is like people, if people can get it and potentially pirate it, and it's my whole income is making Relicblade. Like Relicblade is my total job. I make a couple other games, but like Relicblade is the reason I can or can't afford to eat. So it's a little bit risky, and it's funny because with Patreon, you are getting paid, but under the assumption that like what you're putting out may or may not actually like pay you in the long run. And I have figures on like my mini factory and stuff, and that $20 a month that comes in isn't gonna pay my mortgage.
I think so I mean, I would say that the system that I use is works very well for me, where like Arcworlde is only available as physical miniatures. A lot of them are hand sculpted, so STLs don't exist, and even the digitally sculpted ones, I don't let those STLs aren't available to the public. Whereas my Digital Workshop range is specifically sculpted for Patreon, for people with 3D printers, and obviously there's always going to be people who pirate, and I think something that I think both of us are incredibly lucky to have is that we have a really solid, supportive community who are there to because they're fans of our work, because they want to see us succeed, and they want to support us in our creative endeavors. And Patreon is really great for that, because it's a way for you to give back to that community with all of this content, and they in turn, because it's a lot cheaper for them to support you for $10 a month than it is to buy, tons and tons of plastic, resin and metal kits.
With shipping getting so expensive, it's sort of crazy. But
so definitely, especially across
behind the scenes, like sort of like the things we struggle with as businessmen. But
pulling back the curtain.
But as far as one reason I wanted to hang out and like chat is, well, I feel like you and I exist in the same space, and so in a lot of ways we can have conversations that we can't have with anyone else. And so
absolutely,
I feel like with Relicblade I'm able to produce miniatures that are really highly stylized to my own art style. And so
absolutely,
and there's a connection
I love your art
between
style.
My illustration and my game design and my sculptures, where there's like unity in all of that. And I think Arcworlde has that going for it too, where your illustrations are so clearly Alex Huntley, and then your sculptures are so clearly like that. And I don't know, like I'm sure there are other people out there like JC Fairclough for sure, but it's an interesting thing to be like so small, but also so like true to your own artistic style.
No, 100%. And I think there are a couple of people like us who are those kind of like one-stop shop, do everything types. JC's one of them. Mike from Oathsworn, who creates Burrows and Badgers, is very much, I'm not sure if he does his artwork, but he definitely does all of his sculpting, which is incredible. Big fan of his work. But I do agree with you. I think when I mean, for a lot of wargaming companies or anyone in the RPG tabletop gaming space, creating a game is really, really hard and requires so many different skill sets that a lot of people do feel the need to kind of hire in lots of people to kind of fill those gaps. I know I have over the years, especially particularly when I was first starting out. But like I feel like for me as an artist, it's just nice to kind of just do everything, it very much feels like a labor of love, like it is a passion project, especially with Arcworld, not being my sole source of income anymore, where it was beforehand, and I had to think, right, how do I do this, how do I make it grow, whereas now I can feel like, because it is only a section of my overall business, I can take the time to really kind of like nurture it. And I think part of
so
that
is because I don't know. Do you have another job, or is it Patreon? And because I can't imagine that you're doing other work also. But so
no,
what is the warp?
I mean, warp
workflow.
I've been doing warp full time now for about 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but my current kind of like split is I've got my Patreon, I've got my Mini Factory store, which is kind of like a passive income that just with all of the stuff from my Patreon that I put on. I've got Arcworld, and I also do private commissions for collectors and for other companies as well, and that's been really quite good. I've been working quite a lot recently with Max from Turn It 28, and I've been doing some of his sculpts for his Kickstarter he's just done, and that's been really fun. So I would say it's, as I said, it's about balancing all those different plates together. But particularly this year, I've decided to kind of take a bit of a step up with Arcworld, so I've just got a load of packaging like made and released, because before then it literally was just everything was in little baggies and things. Where I was like, nah, this is because it's at the 10-year anniversary of Arcworld this year, so I've got quite a few big exciting things planned. But I guess it's one of those things where I can kind of take my time with it and just kind of tinker. And actually,
interesting.
One of the things that
sorry to interrupt.
I was going to say, one of the things that you in particular have really inspired me to do. That's all right. What you've really inspired me to do is get back into my drawing again, because I haven't really done much drawing over the past couple of years, particularly since the second edition of the game came out about 4 years ago, and I've really wanted to kind of get back into my 2D art again. I've bought myself an iPad, I've been learning Procreate and stuff, and I've really been kind of trying to work on that hand, even though I'm now drawing digitally as well. I'm still using like ink brushes and everything like that, so it's really just kind of try to make it look. And, I'm actually
for iPad, like there's a brush pack that I'll have to send you a link to, because that really helps.
Is it True Grit?
It's Max Uleshi. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Max Pax is what he calls them, and he has some traditional
cool
media things like watercolor or ink, and that like really is so important to like what I'm going for, is that like hand done thing. And so even though it's digital, I'm able to bring a level of like, texture and life to the digital art. And so it's funny because, with Procreate, it's so easy for it to look like a digital MS Paint thing if you use the default brushes, but with the right stuff you can really bring that character back in. So I'll have to send you a list of the brushes that I like to mess around with, see what suits your style.
Absolutely.
But
speaking of brushes, I have a question for you.
Okay, sure.
What brushes do you use in ZBrush?
All right,
what are the ones that you choose to use?
I use mostly all right, so my main obviously is like clay buildup, just the basic with the square. That's a great way to like start doing form.
Yeah.
But the
Absolutely.
two I rely on the most are a custom brush called Orb Cracks that I was given
Love
some
Orb
ages
Cracks.
ago.
Yes.
And then I actually use Trim Dynamic a lot, which is
Oh yeah.
it's like hard polish, but it's a little bit more stronger, and it will crush.
Oh really? Okay.
And it'll like crush and deform a little bit more. H polish, will come into an edge and really sharpen the edge, which is great.
Go chic.
But the Trim Dynamic will like, I don't know, it cuts in a little bit different. So those I use a lot, especially when you're trying to get those like stylized edges and stuff, because like we're really sculpting with miniatures in mind, whereas in digital sculpture you can make the Hulk for MCU movies, with ZBrush you can
absolutely, yeah,
you can make they use it for everything in entertainment industry. And so because we're using that program to really hack into tabletop miniatures, there are certain things that matter more, and so those types of polishing and cutting details really hard with that Orb Cracks I think has been really key
definitely. Yeah. Like I love Orb Cracks. I use it. I'd say the only brushes I really use to sculpt are, Move obviously, clay buildup, Orb Cracks, H polish, Inflate sometimes if I just want to kind of make things a bit more bigger. But something that I discovered, I'm not sure when it was actually introduced, in which version of ZBrush it was introduced, but I use it on every single model as soon as it's finished and it's been dynameshed. So in the deformation palette, there's a slider called Contrast.
Oh, really?
And basically that pops everything, makes everything, like it deepens all of the cracks and expands all of the detail.
Hang on, what is this? All right. Contrast, you say? And it's after everything's merged and dynameshed. So it's
the last thing I do.
Okay.
Yeah, one subtool, Contrast. I do that, dynamesh it again, close holes, and that's when I start to decimate, and then do all the kind of the. So it's literally one of the final things I do, and
right,
basically
it takes. I'm going to open up one of my current sculpts that I'm working on, and then I'm going to. Oh my gosh. All right, hang on. All right, so I'm working on this little elf guy. If I go
blast it up to 100. Don't be shy. Really whack it up.
I need to merge visible and then dynamesh it.
Dynamesh it. So it needs to be done on a completely dynameshed subtool.
All right, so all right, I've got it up. I've dynameshed this whole figure. We've got an elf here with a gun and deformation. Did you say it's under deformation?
Yeah, contrast.
Contrast. How about that? It's sharpening the details, as you say. All right.
It just sharpens everything, and it just makes everything that much crisper.
Here, I'm going to turn up the resolution a little bit. How much do you normally contrast? Like, do you know a value?
100.
100 all the way up.
Literally, I just whack it. Whack it all up. It looks extreme on the screen. I'll grant you that. But it seriously, particularly for somebody with quite kind of chunky characterful styles like ours, it really just makes the printed model just such sharp, nice lines for the paintbrush to create. It just deepens all the detail.
Very interesting. All right, I'm gonna experiment with that. That's pretty cool. That's an interesting tip.
I just stumbled across it. I literally just stumbled across it.
Huh. How about that? All right, now I can close that. So that's a cool feature. It's
Top
funny
tips.
because, like I said, so much of what I do is approaching it like it's just little pieces of putty. You know, a little. I start with an orb.
Absolutely.
I start with a spherized cylinder, and then I mash it into shape. Use the move tool, clay build up to get it sort of close, and then polish it down or gouge it with orb cracks. So. You know, obviously I do more of a little more deformation or whatever if I'm making like hard surface modeling. But frankly, I mean, since I'm doing a lot of fantasy, I don't do that a ton. You know, swords and armor,
Not really.
sure, come up, but most things are organic shapes.
Oh yeah, but even when I'm doing like hard stuff, which once again, similar to you, isn't very often, I will still kind of sculpt it. You know, I will take, if I'm sculpting a sword, I will take a cube, stretch it out, thin it, and then put on the mirror and just kind of polish it into a point rather than doing all that kind of hard mapping stuff.
And I think
That's
matters
just me. I know it works.
I think we need that that unity of the fantasy realm that we're bringing people into. That if you have a hand sculpted detail next to something that is just perfectly generated, it's a little, it doesn't blend quite right. And so, you know, I mean, it's one thing for an eyeball to be a sphere, like, yeah, that's fine. But yeah, I think getting a little bit of that hand sculpted detail, even in hard surfaces, is important.
Definitely. And something that I do in my sculpts is that, one of the things I would do during the sculpting process, sometimes even if it's like the last thing before I dynamesh it and then do the contrast slider just to kind of make all the details pop, is I will literally take orb cracks and just turn it and just literally add little nicks and things to like the edges of swords and like the edges of armor and even, you know, in the skin of certain creatures and things, just to add those just touches of detail that if you just want to do a wash, because especially with the way that I paint as well, it is very wash based or glaze based. I've been told that technically they are, because I like to paint with very high pigment paints. Like the Citadel base range is my favorite because it's just got super high pigment count, very matte, very lovely, and I just water it down and almost paint over white like it's a watercolor. So all the paint does all the work for me. It kind of seeps into all the cracks, particularly because, you know, our sculpting style is quite deep. Like there's quite a lot of deep detail. Like it really works really nice.
I think that's I think you may have landed on another thing that is really valuable about our work, is that we both paint miniatures. And so, like, as miniature painters, we're like looking for certain things when we buy a figure, and there are certain things that we liked or disliked about models we've painted over the last 20 years. And so
definitely.
And so, but also neither of us are trying to get golden demons. And like, you know, we aren't like hyper invested in painting as a like full art form. We're more invested in painting as a way of bringing out our toys and bringing out the detail in our cool figures. And so
very much so,
that sculpture detail and the sculpture style that we bring to our figures, because I've noticed that in yours as well as in mine, that I believe you are, I know I am, but it comes across in your work that you are thinking about washes, and you are thinking about what will be fun to paint, what will highlight well, and where a paintbrush will fit. I don't get the sense when I paint a warp miniature that you know, are doing details that are unpaintable. And then also you can definitely notice like that it'll take a wash, it'll take a glaze, and it'll come out and be like ready to play with in a way that isn't going to be arduous. Because I mean, I don't notice it as much because I maybe am that you know, loose with my painting style that it doesn't bug me that much. But I've heard people talk about arduous detail and feeling like overwhelmed by too many pouches on their Space Marines or whatever. or too many skulls and details that they have to paint. And I don't worry too much if I don't paint it that well. But yeah, I think with our sculpts, we're able to create something that is very paintable. And I think it comes from a background that is like very focused on miniatures, because neither of us learned to sculpt at a school for video games. And so that means that our skills unfortunately won't translate that great when it's time to become video game people. But hopefully our industry stays healthy. It seems like it's doing well, and I think people are stoked.
It's doing better than ever.
Traditional things, yeah.
I mean, we'll go back to what you were saying before, but the miniatures, we really are in a new golden age of miniatures.
Yeah.
The miniatures hobby, I think 3D printing has made it more accessible than ever. I think like Dungeons and Dragons is cooler now than it's ever been. Warhammer is cooler now than it's ever been. Like more and more people are getting into it. I know it's quite popular to rag on Games Workshop, but they are literally the people that get people into our hobby, and eventually they start to filter through and they start to find other ranges, other games. So the more people that play Games Workshop games, the better, because it just means more people are in our community. But yeah, I completely agree with what you said before about how, by us being painters and being, more casual painters and not Golden Demon players, we do have that in mind when we sculpt a model. It's why I said before, when I make the details super deep, or if I add like little nicks and stuff like that, this is all texture that will all get picked up when somebody's painting it, even if they're rather a novice, And I think something that is something that is important to learn, particularly if you are getting into miniature sculpting, is knowing how much detail to put into a model, because yes, it might look great on a screen, but when it's printed this big, some things just don't work as well. And it's actually something
you can end up like shooting yourself in the foot by making detail that looks bad, but also took you a really long time, and you poured a ton of your heart into
true.
It. So
it's so true.
Yeah. So
and sometimes that detail doesn't even look right until you've already printed and painted, because there've been so many times where like I've shown someone who isn't a sculptor one of the models I'm working on, and they were like, why are their hands so big?
Yeah.
Why is its head so big? It looks really chunky. And I'm like, yes, because it's meant to be printed this big. You've got to scale things up or shrink, to make it work in that medium. And I know that there are certain ranges.
Some people will hear that and think, yeah, well, Alex is making chunky cartoony guys and Sean's making chunky cartoony guys. But like, they probably, you probably bought a model that didn't take that into consideration, and the hands are microscopic and tiny. Or like you'll get on
gun barrels are the worst.
Gun barrels or swords that just come out paper thin when you print them, and it's really disappointing, because there's so many sculptors on Patreon that I would just love to print up their stuff, but just a failed print is a bummer, but then getting it finished and having it fall apart because the details were too fine,
it's so small,
it can be really disappointing.
It's really hard. And I think, and that is something, one of the driving reasons behind why for my Patreon models, every single month I not only print them to show people what they look like, but I paint them to show people what they look like.
You work so much. How do you make? But how are you making Arcworlde at the same time? That's the thing. Because I do this and that, and I have these ideas and I explore, but like I've got to be doing Relicbud.
Absolutely,
it's crazy.
I would say that one of the many benefits of doing Patreon is that it has trained me in the fires of like, what's it called? The gauntlet of like, you have a week to get everything done. Mm-hmm. No fussing about. You have to be a perfectionist about this. You just got to get these models painted. Yeah. So I literally, no matter how many models I sculpt in a month for a month's release, my goal is to have them painted in less than 2 days.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're two very intense days, and that includes doing all the graphics as well. So it literally is.
I know.
And they might
just getting into Photoshop and doing the overlays is such a pain. Writing
long.
Item descriptions
It takes so long.
It's so funny.
It's someone the cutting the models out.
Someone on my Facebook group was like, "Hey, I can't get the digital cards for this faction," and I was like, "Yeah, I know." And finally got around to all that was holding it up was the item description on my web store. I didn't want to have to do all that, but fine. I guess if you guys want to buy it, it's sort of crazy for me to be hiding it because I'm too lazy to do stuff.
But... No, honestly, there are some models that are not on my web store because I can't be bothered to paint them.
I know, or photographing models, all that stuff. It's so funny. So do you, when people order from Arcworlde, from your website, do you ship them or you have help doing that?
I have a lot of help. So my mum and dad are very involved.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Warp, specifically with Arcworlde side. So my dad Rob, he is our resin caster, in-house resin caster, and the quality of his work is phenomenal.
Yeah,
and my mum is she does all the packing and shipping and of stock checking and stuff like that. So it really, I am very much left to be able to focus completely just on the creative side. Obviously, I answer emails and I do all my old marketing because we're creatives in the 21st century. We have no other choice. We have to do all of our own marketing and social media and all that stuff. But yeah, my parents are pivotal to Arcworlde, and to kind of answer your previous question of how do I have time to do Arcworlde as well as on my Patreon stuff, it's because my mum and dad are helping me out so much, and I'm incredibly grateful for their help, and I wouldn't be able to do it without them.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I do every morning I get up and I'm shipping orders, and so before noon all I'm doing is workshop shipping stuff,
Damn.
And so between noon and picking up my daughter at 3, that's my chance to get lunch and hopefully get into the creative side of things. So my time is split a bunch of different ways, but at the same time, I think one thing that also captures my workflow or my business is how much I enjoy miniatures, and how much of my hobby time is also wanting more Relic Blade, is also wanting more figures and things, and so that also plays into it, where I've done sculpts on my birthday because it was all right, I can take some time off and do whatever I want, and what I want is a new miniature. So.
No, absolutely. I had a tradition for very, very many years, is that I would always start something on Christmas Day.
Oh yeah,
that was the thing. Christmas Day, I had to have a Christmas Day project where, and oftentimes it would be really, really great. In fact, I started the second edition of Arcworlde on Christmas Day, 2018.
That's great.
So it was. So, but no, I get it, because we are in this very bizarro world where our work is our hobby and our hobby is our work, and a lot of stuff we're doing we'd be doing anyway, even if we weren't getting paid for it. But then that means brilliant, long day at work, I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling good, I'm going to reward myself with more work. Brilliant.
I kind of see myself as similar to a professional game master, in that sure, playing Dungeons and Dragons is the hobby of a game master, but also a lot of what they're doing is so that other people can really enjoy it and enjoy their own imagination, right? Because the game master is able to create homebrewed things and create a world to explore, and then when they get it to the table, they bring it to their table, and their players get to enjoy it. And so I see myself in a lot of ways as a game master, where I'm ooh, it'd be really cool to go into we're going to do an adventure on this river, but instead I'm writing a new chapter of a Relic Blade thing, or creating new characters, and the tables are all over the world where people are being able to buy and play the game. And so it's like being a professional game master where the art and the story and the world are all just like my homebrew whatever, but at the same time I bring a level of finished polish to it, because it's got to be my business also. And
no, of course.
And
of
like,
course.
so that includes the follow through on things like running the website and shipping the orders and photographing things and trying to stay active on social media. But
it's a lot of work.
But it's so much fun.
Oh.
I love it.
Oh, it really is. I do have another question for you as
sure.
a game designer, as well as game designer, as well as an artist and a sculptor and illustrator. Like, something that I was once told, or I read somewhere, I can't quite remember, when it came to games design, was just because you could doesn't mean that you should.
Sure.
And that just because something seems cool and you feel like you can work it out and how it could work, isn't always right to include it in the game just because it's a puzzle you've solved.
Yeah.
Do you find elements of that when designing rules for Relic Blade? And have you got any examples?
Well, I've got things that are potentially overly complicated, but like one of the core thesis things I arrived at with Relic Blade was to try and make it like really, really simple. Simple can sound wrong, but like I don't want you to have to think about how to do things. I want to make sure the core engine is like really streamlined in a way that is thematic and narrative, but also you won't like struggle to understand. And I've failed before. I've made things that are a little bit too complicated or confusing by using too few of words. But it's true, like whenever I'm writing a rule, I'll have a cool idea, and there are things that I had to just change and not do the way I imagined. The most recent one is I had this character that's a witch, and she has like two eyeball creatures that
cool
that like float around these slime eyeballs. And trying to figure out how to blend her being able to spend her actions to make the eyeballs do things, and getting the wording right and getting it, because it's a totally new like character mechanic in the game. But I also, because the graphic design of the character cards is so limited, it's like it's a mechanical throttle on how complicated I can be. So I think that's really helped me, where if the rule is too complicated to fit into like a sentence or a very, very concise paragraph, then I can't fit it in the game. And so that's really helped with Relic Blade. Whereas with other games, I've written other games. I've written Sludge, which is like a larger war game. I've written Cretaceous Commandos, which isn't published yet. It's like a arcade shooter. And another game, a skirmish version of Sludge, and another game called Atonement, I think, something like that. That's like a more of a Rangers of Shadow Deep sort of like solo or co-op, like going into a demon realm. But with those games, I definitely, without that throttling mechanic, have made things too complicated more often. And so I think that's a really interesting thing, is like creating a core idea. Like, I want the game to be very, very easy to play, but tactically deep. Whereas with other games being like, I want it to be fun and fast and capture the essence of like shooting a gun that fires tons of bullets, right? And then you can end up getting too complicated as you're trying to dial in a feeling compared to the rules. And so it's something I always have to keep track of. That's the real answer. I've got a million examples of having to keep track of that. And I think one thing that we really have to respect about the tabletop hobby compared to, say, a video game is when you're playing a video game, it doesn't matter how many variables are involved in like a to hit or damage mechanic. You know, you can have a boss in Elden Ring be slightly more susceptible to poison or fire or have resistance to holy. And all that stuff is really simple. Like you've got holy damage, you've got fire damage, you've got lightning damage. Like that stuff you can put in a tabletop game, right? Or like even in D&D, you've got like a slashing, piercing, and crushing damage. Like that's something that would be really cool to put into Relic Blade. Like skeletons should be crushable, but super resistant to bleed, right? But the problem is our brains are the game engine, and if you start overheating that at all, the frame rate will drop and the fun will end. And for me,
absolutely.
I get burned out by complicated rules pretty quick. And I played a ton of second edition War Machine and I absolutely adored it. But I also would I started getting like anxious before games because I knew how much of a toll, and then I'd be like worn out afterwards. And I think there's a place for that. I think that that's a really fun thing to have a complicated, hard fought battle with all of the fun of, you know, different defense mechanics or offense mechanics or stacking buffs. But for me, I want to be able to deliver a game that doesn't tax your system, but gives you lots of those like fun moments of tactical choice. And so that's really where Relic Blade comes in, is like I've even heard recently, it was some YouTubers, Esoteric Order of Gamers, they played Relic Blade recently, and they mentioned how that they never felt taxed, that it was fun and tactical, but they never felt like a mental load. And I think like, oh dude, that is totally intentional. Like that's something I fight for.
That's the goal. Yeah. That's the goal. Yeah.
And so, yeah, but I think now after almost 10 years of writing Relic Blade and playing it all the time, I'm way worse at complicated games than I used to be. Like someone starts explaining a new crunchy rule set to me, and I'm like, wow, am I dumb?
No, it's true.
I'm a game designer. What the crap?
No, I get that. I get all the time, and like, you know, I play D&D. I play D&D regularly, and I specifically chose the most simple character I could. It just literally is just a knight with a sword. That's it. And I was like, I don't want to have to think about it. I just want to hit with sword. Yeah. That's it. Because I think, you know, and this is another conversation, I guess, about how, you know, our downtime from being game designers isn't to just then play loads of complicated games. But I think with RPGs, that mental load that you were talking about is done by an entire person. Yeah. The DM's role is to take all of that in and to do a lot of that processing for you. Whereas when you're playing a war game, a lot of people, they just don't want to do the work of a DM in their own head when playing a game. Yeah. And I agree with you, and that's something that I've really tried to like incorporate into Arcworlde as well when I've been writing it, is, you know, make it simple, make it streamlined, because you know, it's like it's not a super complicated game. Yeah, but every game just has to be super complicated.
A really strong emphasis on narrative and like play and character. So I think with Arcworlde, where it takes away from, you know, potentially complicated stacking rules that could add to a fun, it replaces that with a lot of characterful things. Like you can easily have an orc pass his beer to a goblin, and he'll get the effects of getting drunk. But then there's all these like stacking mechanics where you have the rules or abilities have like a theme and a name, and you can really imagine what the character's doing. And so I think that also is like a pathway for fun rule mechanics, where if you know what's happening, it's not just called like attack and then it has an effect. It's got a certain like flavor to it. And I think the flavor is a way to like really streamline those pathways in a human brain, whereas a computer doesn't need to know that like a certain attack has this effect and that's fine. But for a human, being able to imagine the narrative setting really helps. And so I think that's another fun thing that we can offer or do offer in our games, is like a storytelling element that
Definitely
hits something different.
Well, you're right, because the human brain is designed for stories. You know, stories have been a huge part of our culture for literally forever. And I think if you make game mechanics that allow people to kind of make the story in their own head, the game, as you said, it's like the sugar that helps the medicine go down. Like with the game design, with the game mechanics being maths, having a story and narrative helps you kind of process that. And obviously, some people are more inclined to engage with more kind of stats and rules and very hard numbers. But a lot of people, they much prefer that kind of very free form, narrative way of playing. And I know that's how I like to play, which is why the game I designed features more of that rather than crunching numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. So I would say we've been recording for about an hour almost. And hopefully this isn't the only time we get to hang out, because I really think that we get to have a conversation that other people, that I can't have with other people. You know what I mean?
Oh no, I've had lots of fun.
And so it's been very cool. Hopefully this is the first of more conversations that we get to have. But the big thing I'd want to say is, if you have been playing Arcworlde, check out Relicblade. If you've been playing Relicblade, check out Arcworlde. It's funny to say it because it might seem like they're very similar, or like they exist in the same space. But I think in a lot of ways they are so different, and so offer so much. And if you like that like artist driven game, then like I think people should be playing both for sure.
Definitely.
And I'm so stoked that we've finally been able to talk a bit about things. And yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the future of being able to, be more connected with the community as indie creators and help, promote each other. So.
100%. And I would be more than happy to come back on the show and to talk about, maybe some of your viewers could put some questions to us that, as our miniature sculptors and game designers, that we could talk about. I mean, that could be something quite fun for a future episode. I'd be more, as I said, I'd love to come back and chat more about the thing that obsesses both of our lives independently.
Cool. Well, thank you, Alex. It was very fun having you on the show, and I'm sure we'll do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, mate. Thank you very much.